Last year, a game by the name of A Plague Tale Innocence was released, and upon seeing the trailer, I was immediately interested. Not only did this game look stunning, but the trailer immediately set a mood, so I purchased it. But then something happened that I'm sure a lot of you are intimately familiar with. It ended up getting lost in my Steam library. It was only recently, on a really cold day while being stuck inside, bored out of my mind, that I decided to peruse that library for something new to play, only to find it. So I downloaded it immediately before I had a chance to forget it yet again, something that also happens way too often these days. And the next morning I booted it up and have absolutely no memory of that day. All I remember is being completely engrossed by the tale of Amicia de Rune and her brother Hugo, two children left to find their way in a land overtaken by plague. When I first started the game, the setting was incredibly tranquil, and I knew immediately that I was going to like this game because before anything else, I was able to pet my dog. And that's how you win me, even though I didn't like what happened immediately after. Anytime I get to pet a dog in a game or in real life, that's a win in my book. That serenity I felt in those first few moments was quickly broken, however, as the darkness that overshadows this entire game swiftly swooped in. And before I knew it, my family and all the people who worked on our estate were being mercilessly slaughtered by the Inquisition, and I was left to guide my little brother to safety. Without missing a beat, A Plague Tale went from being mildly interesting to completely enthralling as the story picked up in pace and the world slowly transitioned from one of safety and of home to one of danger, a world riddled with disease and violence. But to really understand what makes this game so amazing is to understand the elements that it's made of, because there's no one thing that stands out. The people of Asobo Studios who developed A Plague Tale created a myriad of incredible elements, and then blended them together in such a way that they created more of an experience than a game. I think the first thing I want to talk about is the narrative of this game, because the game is mostly its story, and the story is finely crafted and blended incredibly well into the gameplay. Now, I don't want to discuss it too in depth as to avoid any spoilers, but there is so much to unpack about how the story was written, about the symbolism, and about all the metaphors that I might deep dive into it at another time, but for now, I will try to keep this as spoiler-free as I possibly can. Outside of maybe the main villains, there was very little reliance on the standard tropes that we often see in games. The characters are flawed, and they're not always concerned about the greater good or even each other. Amicia, the main character, the character you play through most of the game, shows fear as well as bravery, regret as well as gladness, and she is completely foolish as well as clever. Amicia is not your standard hero. She is human and she's still a child trying to make her way in an unfamiliar world. She's not some infallible creature. One thing she is, however, and it's an important one, is relatable, as are the rest of the characters. They're friends and family, but they bicker and they interact with each other in ways that real people interact with each other. And they don't have that tendency to overreact about everything, even the super small things, like we often see in TV and film. The story itself is also not overly contrived. There's nothing that feels like it was just wedged in to create more drama or to extend playtime or for some other arbitrary reason. Everything that was added feels like it was added for a purpose, and nothing was drug out too far. If anything, I think they could have added more in, as some of the side characters, particularly Roderick and Lord Nicholas, were interesting, but we never got to know them really well. It really oftentimes felt like I was reading a book or watching a film that I was able to interact with instead of playing a video game, and it just worked so well. The world in which A Plague Tale is set almost feels like a character in its own right. It's incredibly alive for being so filled with death. The areas feel like you could step on into them. You feel like people actually live in this world, or lived anyway. I mean, there is a plague going on. For the most part, the landscape comes across as being incredibly dreary, even if the sun is shining bright. It's as if the land itself is sick or in mourning. And the way in which the world is crafted, I was never really sure how linear the maps are. I know you can go off the beaten path. I did quite often my ever-present search for supplies, but the way everything was designed, it's such that even if it leads you down a very specific and very narrow path, it never really feels like it. I always felt like I was moving freely through the world. Even completely open world games have never given me a feeling of presence like this one does. There are very few video games in which I find the music memorable. In fact, I have a tendency to oftentimes mute an entire game if the music and dialogue work together to be really annoying and really repetitive. But the music in A Plague Tale is orchestrated so well, and it helps create such an ambiance that I actually searched out the soundtrack after I finished the game and even put some tracks onto a few of my playlists. Something that happens very, very rarely. I really wish I could just sit here and play some of these tracks for you, but I just don't want to be dinged by copyright. The music fits the setting and each individual scene so incredibly well, and it feels like the composer, and again, excuse my butchering of the name, but Olivier Derivière really understood the story and the setting. It feels like he put a lot of thought and emotion into this work. It moves you and it helps to guide you on this journey. It takes all those feelings that you experience while playing and it amplifies them. Add to the music the sound effects and the dialogue from the characters, and you're really in for an experience. Do yourself a favor and play this game with a headset. It's gonna really help you to immerse in this world, and this world's worth getting immersed into. I cannot even count how many times I realized I was having a physical reaction to this game. I'd be leaning forward in my chair, my heart would be racing, my muscles would be completely tensed, I'd be holding my breath, and I attribute a lot of that to the music. It really brings you into this world and it just holds you there. The gameplay of A Plague Tale is nothing grandiose. In fact, it's simple. It's really simple. The majority of the game is spent in stealth mode, or at least it feels that way, since during roughly the first half, Amicia has an aversion to killing, and will often plead with her aggressors to stand down so she doesn't have to take actions against them if she's put in a situation where she may. Her slingshot, which is the only weapon she has, can launch a variety of different projectiles to accomplish various tasks. However, there's no variation on how they can be used. Rocks will kill, pots will distract, ignifer will create fire, and extinguish will extinguish it. In some cases, you do need to switch between these in quick succession to remain alive, but that's about as complex as battle gets. Your slingshot will also even help you with targeting, turning yellow and locking onto anything it can be slung at. It takes a lot of work and skill out of the equation. There's also no way to increase the difficulty, but that is at most kind of a slight annoyance, at least it was to me, as this game is driven more by the narrative, and even though I wasn't challenged from a battle perspective, I found myself still being completely engrossed and entranced, sometimes by the dialogue, but oftentimes more so by the music, as I previously mentioned. There's also no leveling up, no hit points, no gear collecting. You can upgrade what you have, but all those upgrades really do is either expand your inventory or make your gear less noisy to help with stealth. No matter what part of the game you're in, one wrong move and you're dead. Luckily, unlike a lot of games that have a one-shot and you're dead sort of system, autosave never rests. So even if you die, at most you're going to have to maybe replay about a minute or two. And my biggest concern prior to launching the game for the first time was that the entire experience was just going to be one long escort quest, which in most games are the worst types of quests. And yes, you spend a large portion of this game escorting your brother around, but he's not a hindrance at all. Your movement's not affected, he does not just start alerting guards haphazardly, breaking your stealth, and his AI is such that he'll stick right to your side unless instructed to do otherwise. Same goes for when you have other companions, and all companions have their specialties, from picking locks to basically being a human battering ram. All in all, even though this game is not chock full of action or intense battles, the way this game immerses you, you barely really notice. After all is said and done, I have to say A Plague Tale: Innocence is one of the best gaming experiences that I've had in a long time. Even though it wasn't difficult or flashy, playing this game again was like reading a novel or watching a TV series that I was able to interact with. I can't really compare it to any other title. It just kind of feels like it did its own thing. But it moved me emotionally. It had me reacting physically. I was completely invested. And I want to know more about the characters. I want to know more about the world, about the history that was touched on. I'm so eager to hear any news of a sequel. And I know it may sound cheesy to some of you, but if a game could be poetry, it would be A Plague Tale: Innocence. And with that, as per the usual, it's been a hoot. Until next time, have fun.